Hi guys, how are you doing? I'm Toto and I'm here with Joey Sticks. And today we will be talking about the top 5 lineups for Runeterra Open Eternal format.
So let's head right into it. We'll give you some lineups to think about if you're thinking about playing the Open tomorrow, as this video is going up on the Friday before the Open. And the first lineup we'll start with is the most popular lineup.
This lineup consists of the 3 most played decks and the 3 the better decks for the expansion right now, for the format actually. We're talking about Az, Sarah and Janna, TF and Nyla, and Thresh and Nasus.
So let's see the first archetype, which is Ezreal, Seraphine, and Janna, just a single copy of Janna. This archetype was already built before this format got here, but we have the addition of Ezreal, which before was not a part of this archetype, right, Toto?
Yes, Ezreal came in this archetype to be a finisher actually. This archetype is kind of strange in the standard format, but in the Eternal, I think Ezreal is a really good and consistent card for to finish your games.
And the new cards that were added to Ezreal to really help this archetype come together were the Explorers, which were a last addition in the last standard format, so they are here for Eternal. And also we have a mix of the 2 best landmarks in the game, Sunken Temple and Bakali Bar. The rest is just the same cards that you've already seen in this archetype, so just think of this deck as a Seraphine deck with an Ezreal finish for when your hand just, empties and you don't have anything else to do. You top deck Ezreal and he will for sure help you deal that last bit of damage to get a win.
So let's talk about the second deck for this lineup. We're talking about the TF Nyla. This is a TF Janna deck, but for the Eternal format actually. This deck is pretty much the same, but it's stronger. It has a lot of more combos. It buys cards, draws cards very consistently, and I think it's one of the most broken decks in the format right now.
TF is just a powerhouse in this format, so it would be no surprise that we would have a list dedicated to him, including Suit Up to help him make more resistant to removals. I just want to point out that there are several versions of this list, so you may find lists that don't bring the Master Lookout, for example, or the late game finishers such as the Wise and Helmsman, because the Divine Whirlwind was nerfed and then people started to complement this list with extra, more aggressive units in the early game, such as the Windborn Mariner with the iterative combo, right, to copy it.
So let's talk about the third and the last deck for this lineup. We're talking about Thresh and Nasus. Nasus plays in the standard format, but in the Eternal he's more aggressive and plays in this aggressive type of decks for the Shadow Isles archetype. Those cards are really strong in the early game, and Nasus and Thresh, they really come together to play this combo where the Thresh just levels up and brings Nasus to the play for free and doesn't have anything to stop this combo now.
Yeah, Thresh is a very unkillable unit even in Eternal, because as the meta is very aggro, not everyone is bringing removals for such a big unit such as Thresh, and he levels up pretty quickly because everyone is playing small units because, again, it's aggro. As Eternal is the aggro format, of course we would have Thresh and Nasus, which are the aggro predators, I guess.
Another thing about this deck is that it's one of the few decks that plays with Rite of Negation, and it's a card that really comes up pretty good in this format. Not a lot of decks play with this card, but this one is exceptional with this negation because a lot of decks play with Atrocity, and it's a very good counter for this card.
We also have the addition of the new card, which is the Spectral Iron Hound, which is, as we said before in another video, one of the better dragons that we got in the last variety pack. Let's head into the second lineup that we're going to talk about. This is the most aggressive lineup. So as we discussed, Eternal format is an aggressive format. So these are the most aggressive decks that you may find in a lineup competitively.
Yeah, so let's talk about the Endure. This is like a Nasus and Thresh deck, but it's more aggressive. The main difference for these two decks is that Nasus Trash can play a lot of more control spells, so you can like Rite of Negation and the Nasus Bonk that you can do to remove your opponent's cards. But this list is way more aggressive. You don't have anything to do with your opponent's board. You just go face, and then you win more. You win more aggressively, and you also lose more aggressively.
When you drop Nasus on the board, you usually want to level him up and then atrocity it to the opponent axis, whereas Endure really just comes down as a finisher on its own as it has Overwhelm. So usually you'll be looking for a turn 6 or 7 lethal.
So let's talk about the second one. It's this Tristana Atrocity, which is kind of similar to the last deck. Also is an Atrocity deck, but it's much more like focused on the Yordles and those small units. Tristana can actually be played a lot earlier in the game compared to the other champions like Nasus that we're talking about. So I guess this deck is kind of more control-ish because you have Vengeance, you have so many cheap removals also to deal with your opponent's cards. But it's an Atrocity deck and it's very aggressive.
It also has a lot of damage through impact, the keyword, so you'll be chipping away damage in places where you don't expect, and sometimes even a Tristana with 4 impact or something can already bring you the victory. And it also brings the negation, as Toto was saying, with the Puzzling Silent Pulse card. This list remained the same from the last time we were in Eternal, so this should be a pretty safe archetype if you're used to playing this list.
The last one is a new archetype we're seeing in ranked play. It's Vidraven good cards. Now, good cards is a term we use to just a bunch of good cards from those two regions. We're talking about the good cards from Noxus and the good cards from Piltover and Zon. So we have a kind of archetype that plays with these cards, Overwhelm, Elusives, Burn damage, so pretty much everything you have in those regions that can deal damage to the Nexus, we have in this deck.
I also want to point out that this deck almost plays with a few 3-card combos as we used to discuss it, so you won't see the swarm aggro style that we see in Eternal for Endure and Nasus and even Tristana. Instead, you'll see windows of opportunity to deal lethal damage to your opponent through an Overwhelmed Vi, for instance, or a flipped Vi with a Ruined Reckoner, for instance. So look for these windows of opportunity where you can combo with 3 or more cards.
It's a very good deck, very consistent. I really recommend you to test this lineup, and I really like this one for the ranked also. If you want to boost your elo, I think Vidraven is one of the best decks right now. So let's right into the control lineup. Control is a thing that doesn't really do much in the standard, but in Eternal we have those 3 decks, and I think those are the best 3 decks in the format right now.
So starting with an old favorite, we have Aphelios Victor Epiphany. We call it Epiphany, but in the end this is just Aphelios Victor Targon Piltover and Zal. Whatever you build with this is probably gonna have a few of the same cards, but then a couple of different finishers. It's up to you if you want to bring Epiphany or the Winding Light, or maybe some other conditions such as Bar or Slow Burn. There are variations to this list, but in the end, the whole archetype is built around Victor and Aphelios, which are very strong cards in Eternal. So it's just a bunch of good cards also.
This version is more focused on the celestial cards. You have the Sun Monument and the Epiphany, Starlit Epiphany combo. I think this is one of the more consistent formats for this deck. I think the other ones are more suited for the ranked match, and I think this is like the best for you if you want to play in a control lineup.
This used to be called the Rubin's Pile, so it was Rubin's Pile then, and it is still Rubin's Pile now. Just a pile of good cards from these two regions. As we see, the Piltover and Zal can really support the game until we reach the Celestial late Targon game plan. So, just a bunch of good cards.
So let's go talk about the Lissandra and Volibear. This is one of the most consistent control decks in the format, consisting ramping your mana and then playing She Who Wonders fast as you can. So She Who Wonders is one of the best finisher cards in the game right now. if you think about a lot of decks in the format play with those little small units, so She Who Wonders actually obliterates your opponent's entire board and your opponent's entire hand very consistently.
She Who Wonders is definitely a powerhouse in this list, but if you're trying to master this archetype, you need to really know how to balance the ramp portion of your deck with the control portion of your deck. So in some matchups and in some hands, in starting hands that you get, you want to ramp as fast as possible and just play She Who Wonders because that's the strongest play you can do. And in other hands, you need to be a little more conservative and play Vile Feats and Avalanches, for instance.
So let's talk about the last one for the control lineup. We're talking about Set and Trundle, which actually is another deck for She Who Wonders archetype, but we are playing with Ionia. Ionia, it's a region that doesn't destroy your opponent's cards. In fact, it just stuns them, and we have also Freljord that frostbites them. So you are not actually dealing with your opponent units, you are just controlling the board with different ways. But it's the same deck, you just play She Who Wonders and obliterate your opponent's entire board and entire hand.
It's also a chance to play with Set and his dad, which is the old timer. So if you like Set, if you like the sort of control that he brings to your middle game more than just Trundle, this is your deck for this lineup.
So let's go talk about the anti-meta lineup. Those three decks that I picked are the best suited for you to play against the first lineup that we saw. We're talking about the TF and Nyla, the Seraphine Janna and Ezreal decks, and the Nasus Trash. Those decks are very good against those ones because they are playing with a lot of overwhelm units, a lot of chip damage, a lot of removals that can deal with the units that we're talking about. The decks would be the Ezreal and Janna, and overall just do a lot of damage and are very consistent.
The first deck didn't change at all from the last time we've seen it. It's just Gwen and Sejuani. It deals a lot of chip damage. So we have the Tusk Speaker dealing chip damage. We have Gwen draining the Nexus, and it usually brings big Freljord units that won't be easily removed through Ezreal piles, for instance. And it also finishes the game quite quickly, especially if you look for those turns where you can just play Battle Fury and win through a surprising play.
So another thing about this deck, it's also an atrocity deck. So keep in mind that this card is one of the most aggressive ones and the strongest cards in this format right now. A lot of decks will be playing this card in this tournament. The second deck we are talking about this anti-meta lineup is the Gnar and Poppy list, and it's a very aggressive one.
Gnar is here because we will be using Ziggs in another list that we will show you right afterward. So we decided to swap and put Gnar in, and he's actually a pretty good replacement. He creates a lot of lethal situations with Overwhelm. It's very easy to flip him in this list, and also has an extra poke stick if you need more drops.
This is one of the most aggressive decks in the format right now. Actually is one of the best lists for you to play in your ranked ladder also. So the third one and the last one for this anti-meta lineup is Taliyah and Ziggs. It's a very old archetype, but it's very consistent. We have a lot of cheap damage that you can deal in your opponent in the early game, and a lot of good finishers also. And the champions are very strong if you can put Overwhelm in them.
These champions are very, very resistant because they have a lot of health points, and this list also plays in a way that you can find windows of opportunity to get a lethal with Absolver or even a stun. So again, look for these combos with 3 or 2 cards that can bring you to victory once you play them.
So let's talk about the last ones, the last lineup for today. This lineup is for those people that don't actually want to play the Open in a more competitive scheme. If you want to just have fun, if you want to just participate, this is for the adventurous players that just want to participate and have fun in the tournament.
This lineup was built to hit on Azarelia. As we've seen, there are a few ramp decks in the meta, and Azarelia beats those, so Azarelia is a very popular archetype again. So these lists will help you deal with Azarelia once you get to the tournament.
The first one is Elise Timo Burn. This deck is one of the best to deal damage against your opponent. You just ignore the opponent's board and deal your just throw your spells in your opponent's face and just win the game.
Yeah, this is a very old list with a few very important backups, such as the augmented clockling, but it plays the same way as it ever did. You just throw burn spells or skills at the opponent's nexus and finish them off before they can do anything.
The second one, it's Mono Fiora. It's a very funny deck. You just have Fiora as a main win condition. You can't win the game with anything else, actually. You just protect her, buff her, and she will eventually deal damage enough to kill any of your opponent's units, and she will win the game with her effect, level 2 effect.
Just be careful with Hush effects, so any Targon deck can be potentially hard to deal with if you're playing Fiora, and also both Ionia and Freljord have a good matchup against her, so she's more to deal with the other aggressive decks in the format.
And the last one we're going to talk about is the Sivir Renekton. Remember we were talking about the Vi and Draven deck. This is kind of this list, but with Churima. We are playing with another overwhelm units. We have Rite of Negation also. It's a more control-ish kind of type of deck compared to the Draven one, but it's the same list. We have a lot of burn, we have a lot of ways to deal damage against your opponent's nexus.
The difference is that this list is going to have Spell Shield, which can be a pretty important tool if you're facing a lot of Ezreal pile lists, for instance, but otherwise it plays just the same.
And that's it, guys. Those were the top 5 lineups for Runeterra Open Eternal format. Hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next.
Bye.
Bye.